The young deaf woman arrived in silence, frightened and rejected. But as she was welcomed by the Apache, something in her began to bloom. Through gestures, she revealed a gift that no one imagined, and the entire tribe bowed before her. Subscribe to the channel and discover how someone who was discarded became a living legend. The exchange happened on the riverbank, under the cloudy sky of a dry August in the Pantanal. Fiantenor didn't look into his daughter's eyes when he handed her over to Irapua for 2 bags of rare medicinal herbs. Cecilia, 22 years old and deaf since the age of 3, when a high fever left her in eternal silence, kept her eyes lowered, her hands clutching a small bundle of clothes. She didn't protest, didn't shed a tear. What was there to cry about when you've been treated like merchandise since you can remember? Antenor cleared his throat, trying to disguise his discomfort. She doesn't cause trouble, but she doesn't help with anything either. She eats little at least, he said, as if describing a docile mare. In the big city, they said there's no cure. She's been deaf-mute since birth. Irapua, a middle-aged man with sun-marked skin and eyes as deep as the river, merely nodded. He belonged to the Guato people, ancient navigators of the Pantanal known as the people of the waters. It wasn't pity he felt for the girl, but something more complex that even he couldn't name. Something in her eyes, in the way she observed the movement of the waters while the men decided her fate, awakened in him a certainty. She saw the world in a way that others had forgotten. The herbs cure 3 types of snake venom and lower any fever. Fair deal, was all he said before pointing to the canoe moored on the muddy bank. Cecilia climbed into the vessel without hesitation, her thin body tense under the faded dress that was too big for her size. Behind her remained the shack where she had grown up being called the mute one, the weird one, the one with no future. Ahead, only the unknown. The journey through the river's meanders lasted almost an entire day. Irapua paddled with precise movements, knowing every curve, every sandbank. Cecilia observed everything with an attention that revealed her way of understanding the world, through her eyes, through vibrations, through smells. When a school of golden fish passed under the canoe, she felt them before seeing them, subtly leaning toward the water. Irapua noticed but said nothing. In the afternoon, when they stopped at a sandy beach to rest, he offered her a piece of smoked fish and fruits. They ate in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. For the first time in her life, Cecilia didn't feel obligated to try to understand lips that moved too quickly, expressions of impatience when she didn't comprehend. The man simply existed beside her without demands. They resumed the journey as the sun began to set. It was then that Cecilia saw the first anaconda, enormous, sliding silently among water lilies. Instinctively, she touched Irapua's arm and pointed. He smiled, a brief smile that transformed his severe face. "You see what many cannot," he murmured, knowing she wouldn't hear him, but feeling the need to acknowledge that moment. The village appeared when the sky was already darkening, a collection of wooden and straw houses built on high ground, protected from floods. Firelight dotted the nascent night. When the canoe docked, several people approached. Murmurs spread like wind through dry leaves. A white, mute girl sold by her own father. What did Irapua intend by bringing this stranger? A child pointed, curiously. An old man frowned. Women exchanged glances. Cecilia shrank even more, accustomed to being an object of astonishment and pity. But then an elderly woman with grey hair and a face marked by deep wrinkles made her way through the curious onlookers. It was Donna Jupira, the most respected elder in the village, knowledgeable about plants and spirits. Without ceremony, she took Cecilia's hand and led her away from the stairs into her wooden house lit by oil lamps. There, she made her sit on a mat, offered her a cup of hot tea, and with simple gestures indicated that she could rest. It was the first gesture of kindness Cecilia had received in years. That night, lying on a clean mat, covered by a soft fabric that smelled of herbs, Cecilia slept a dreamless sleep for the first time since she could remember. Meanwhile, in the central house of the village, the council was meeting. Jupira spoke with authority, while Irapua remained silent. "She has the gaze that sees beyond," affirmed the elder. "I noticed when I brought her," Irapua finally confirmed. The Toa. White men from the city are getting closer with each moon. They say they will build a dam that will flood our lands in 6 moons. We need all eyes that can see what we do not see. A younger man protested. But she is deaf. How will she help us? She's just another mouth to feed. Jupira struck her staff on the dirt floor. You hear, but you do not listen. She does not hear, but she sees. There are many ways to know the world. The discussion continued deep into the night, but Jupira had already made her decision. The girl would stay at least until they proved she was wrong, or until the waters rose and carried everyone away. The first rays of sunlight found Cecilia already awake, observing through the window the movement of the village as it awakened. A group of children played near the river. Women carried water, men prepared fishing nets. It was an organized world with its own rhythm, a world where she still had no place. Among the children, a girl of approximately 5 years old observed her with frank curiosity. Without warning, the little one ran to the window where Cecilia was and offered her a small, delicate purple flower. It was the first gift in a life of absences. 15 days had passed since Cecilia's arrival at the Guato village. At first, she always walked with her head down, hunched as if expecting a blow at any moment. She was startled by sudden movements, slept with her hands tightly clenched into fists. But she also observed. She observed like no one had ever observed that place before. The flower girl, whose name was Janaina, became her constant shadow. With no words to exchange, they communicated through gestures, expressions, small gifts. Janaina showed Cecilia the secrets of the village, the best place to see birds, where the most beautiful flowers grew, how to make fish rise to the surface by throwing small seeds into the water. Cecilia responded by teaching the girl to feel the vibration of drums with her hands, to identify animals by their tracks, to read the sky before rain. Jupira observed this friendship flourish and smiled, satisfied. She is blossoming like a water lily after the flood, she commented to Irapua one morning as they both watched Cecilia help the women sort seeds. Irapua agreed with a nod, his eyes never leaving the attentive, thin figure of the young woman. He had noticed how she had begun to walk differently. Straighter spine, firmer steps, more direct gaze, like someone slowly recalling their own strength. The first time Cecilia surprised everyone was when she anticipated the storm. On a clear afternoon, without a single cloud in the sky, she began collecting hanging clothes, tying up canoes, storing utensils. Jupira noticed and asked Janaina through gestures what was happening. The girl shrugged. 2 hours later, the sky suddenly darkened and a violent storm swept through the region. While everyone ran for shelter, Cecilia was already safe, observing the fury of the waters. The next day, Jupira called her to accompany her in collecting herbs. It was an invitation, not an order, the first time anyone had given her a choice. Cecilia accepted with a simple gesture. They walked along muddy trails, moving away from the village. Jupira showed plants, explained their uses with gestures, for pain, for fever, for healing wounds. Cecilia absorbed everything, but also surprised. She stopped in front of a plant that Jupira had ignored, knelt down and carefully pulled out its roots. With precise gestures, she explained that the root, if mixed with mud, relieved insect bites. Jupira's eyes widened. That knowledge was not common. It was the first time the old healer realized that Cecilia was not just learning, she was remembering ancient knowledge, as if her connection to the earth dispensed with words. The news spread. The white, mute girl understood the language of nature. Some observed her with renewed suspicion, others with growing respect. Irapua kept his distance but was always nearby like a silent sentinel. In the 3rd week, the first signs of danger arrived. A group of men appeared in the village, led by a man in an expensive shirt and alligator leather boots. Engineers and surveyors, they said. They were mapping the region for a development project, a dam that would use the river waters to generate energy. The conversation was tense. The leader, who introduced himself as Paulo Mendonça, spoke with false cordiality about progress, compensation, resettlement. Beautiful words to describe destruction. You'll have 4 months to prepare. After that, the waters will begin to rise, he announced, as if doing them a favor. It's a generous deadline. Jupira was not fooled. This land has been ours for many generations. The river is our brother, not merchandise. Paolo smiled condescendingly. I understand your position, ma'am, but the project has already been approved in Brasilia. We come merely as a courtesy to prepare you. While the discussion unfolded, Cecilia observed the men. She couldn't hear them, but she read their bodies, the disguised tension, the furtive glances measuring everything around. One of them, younger, seemed uncomfortable, avoiding looking directly at the residents. It was on him that Cecilia fixed her gaze. The man noticed, grew uneasy. He leaned over to say something in Paolo's ear, who then noticed Cecilia for the first time. And who is this? She doesn't look indigenous, he asked, pointing. She's my niece, Jupira replied quickly. She's under our protection. Paolo studied Cecilia for a few seconds, intrigued by her appearance and stillness. Then he shrugged. Well, in any case, everyone will have to leave. Indians, whites, whoever else is here. Water makes no distinction. After the visitors' departure, the council met in emergency. The threat now had a set date, 4 months until the dam began to function, 4 months until their world was swallowed by the waters. They lie, affirmed one of the fishermen. Construction began months ago. I saw the machines when I went upriver. We need a plan, said another. Perhaps resistance, perhaps negotiation. The debate heated up. Jupira remained silent until everyone had spoken. Then, with the authority of her 80 years, she declared, "We will fight, not with weapons, but with our greatest strength, our knowledge of this land." Her eyes met Cecilia's, who remained at the edge of the meeting. "And we will need all our senses." That night, while the village tried to digest the threat hanging over them, Cecilia couldn't sleep. She went out silently and walked to the riverbank. The full moon reflected on the calm waters, creating a silver path. It was there that Irapua found her, sitting on a rock, her bare feet touching the water's surface. He sat beside her, respecting the space between them. Cecilia felt his presence before seeing him, but wasn't startled. There was something about this man that made her feel safe, even in silence. For a long time, they simply existed side by side, witnessing the night. Then, in a surprising gesture, Irapua extended his open hand between them. An offer, not an imposition. Cecilia hesitated only for an instant before placing her hand on his. The warmth of that contact spread through her body like a wave, awakening sensations she didn't know were possible. It wasn't just a touch. It was the first true choice she had made in her life. The river flowed, impassive, carrying the reflection of two silhouettes that approached like converging constellations in the night sky. The village transformed into an anthill of activities. With only 3 months remaining before the waters would rise, every minute became precious. The council decided to fight for the land in 2 ways, documenting their ancestral presence for the courts and preparing for possible confrontations. Cecilia found her place in this resistance. Her hands, once timid, now mapped medicinal herbs, identified sacred sites, worked tirelessly side by side with the women of the village. One afternoon, while organizing dried plants in Jupira's house, Cecilia felt a different vibration in the ground. It wasn't the trot of horses, nor the familiar rhythm of drums in celebrations. It was something mechanical, distant but approaching. She ran outside, urgently gesturing to Jupira. The elder understood the alert and summoned the men. On the horizon, a cloud of dust announced the arrival of vehicles. "They've arrived before the deadline," murmured Irapua, who quickly organized a group to receive the visitors at the village entrance. This time, it wasn't just the engineers. Paulo Mendonça was accompanied by armed men, security, he called them, and by a court official carrying documents. "We've come to officially notify you that the deadline has been recalculated. You have 30 days, no more," announced Paulo, his tone now stripped of any previous cordiality. "Impossible," replied Irapua, standing firm despite the veiled threat of the weapons. The law guarantees our rights to this land. We have documents, historical records. Paolo smiled disdainfully. Documents can be lost, stories can be forgotten. Progress, my friend, is inevitable. While the men argued, Cecilia observed the movement. She noticed the young engineer from the previous visit, again uncomfortable. He held a folder full of papers and avoided looking directly at the residents. There was something in his gestures that aroused her curiosity. When the visitors were leaving, Cecilia made a bold decision. She approached the young engineer and deliberately dropped a small basket of herbs she was carrying. The young man, instinctively, bent down to help collect them. Their eyes met. Cecilia discreetly pointed to the folder and then to herself, a silent question in her eyes. The young man hesitated, looked around to make sure no one was watching, then quickly slid a map into the basket. A second later, he was standing again, hurrying to catch up with his colleagues. That night was an emergency council. The map that Cecilia had obtained revealed the true plan for the dam, much larger than had been announced, flooding not just the village but the entire sacred region where their ancestors were buried. More serious still, the environmental impact studies had been falsified, ignoring endangered species and archaeological sites protected by law. This could be our salvation, declared Jupira, holding the document like a treasure. But we need to get this information to the right authorities in Brasilia, and we need more evidence. It was decided that a small group would travel to the state capital to meet with lawyers and environmentalists who could help. Irapua would lead the mission. The surprise came when he announced, "Cecilia will come with me." The protests were immediate. How could a deaf woman help in such a delicate mission? How would she communicate with strangers? Irapua remained unyielding. She sees what we do not see. She perceives intentions that words may hide, and no one will suspect her. Jupira supported the decision, adding, "Besides, she knows every plant in this region. She can identify endangered species that the official reports ignored." The next morning, before dawn, Cecilia and Irapua departed in an old pickup truck borrowed from an allied merchant. The journey would be long, 2 days on precarious roads to the capital. For Cecilia, it was the first time she had traveled so far from the village since her arrival. She felt both apprehensive and strangely free. Irapua drove in silence, occasionally pointing to something interesting in the landscape. Rare birds, centennial trees, the river snaking in the distance. They didn't need words to share their fascination with the world around them. The first night, they camped by the roadside. Under the starry sky of the Pantanal, Irapua lit a small fire. While they ate fruits and roasted cassava, he surprised Cecilia by doing something unexpected. He began to teach her signs. It wasn't the official sign language, but gestures he had learned from a deaf cousin in childhood. Slowly, with infinite patience, he showed her how to say water, food, danger, friend. Cecilia absorbed each movement like dry earth absorbs. Rain. Finally, hesitantly, he showed the sign for heart, the closed hand over the chest, then opened toward the other person. Their eyes met over the dancing flames. Neither completed the gesture, but something was exchanged in that look, more eloquent than any word could ever be. The second day of travel brought the first complication. A police roadblock on the main road forced them to take a detour on a secondary road, muddy from recent rains. The pickup was advancing with difficulty when Cecilia noticed something strange, recent tire marks, but no other vehicle in sight. She touched Irapua's arm, pointing to the ground. He slowed down, understanding the alert. It was enough to avoid the ambush. 3 armed men suddenly appeared at the next curve, but Irapua was already prepared. With a quick maneuver, he swerved onto a side trail almost invisible among dense trees. The men ran back to a parked jeep and began the pursuit. For 20 terrifying minutes, the pickup jumped over precarious trails while the jeep relentlessly followed them. It was Cecilia who saw salvation, a small stream with an improvised bridge that seemed too fragile to support a vehicle's weight. She pointed frantically. Irapua understood, accelerated over the bridge, which creaked dangerously, but held. The pursuing jeep tried to do the same, but the structure gave way under its greater weight. When they looked in the rearview mirror, they saw the vehicle stuck in the stream, the men getting out furious and soaked. They laughed together for the first time, a laugh of relief, of complicity, of something being born between fear and hope. They arrived at the capital at nightfall, exhausted but unharmed. The contact indicated by Jupira was a lawyer specialized in indigenous rights, Dr. Helena Martins. In her modest but organized office, she examined the documents they had brought with growing indignation. "This is criminal," she finally declared. "They are violating at least 5 environmental laws and completely ignoring the historical demarcation of Guato lands." The lawyer explained that they would need more than documents. They would need concrete evidence of the ancestral presence and ecological importance of the region. "Do you have photographic records of the endangered species, of the archaeological sites, of the traditional rituals?" Irapua denied, frustrated. The village had always resisted being documented, fearing that their traditions would be exploited as tourist attractions. Dr. Helena sighed. "Without visual evidence, it will be very difficult to get an injunction in time." It was at this moment that Cecilia had an idea. She took the lawyer's notebook and quickly drew, first a rare bird that inhabited only that region, then an endangered medicinal plant, finally the pattern of an ancient indigenous cemetery. Her drawings were precise, detailed, revealing a talent that no one knew about. The lawyer looked admiringly. "This helps, but we still need photos, scientific documentation." Irapua translated for Cecilia, who nodded determinedly. She made another drawing, a camera, then pointed to herself and to the way back. The message was clear. She would record everything. "We have exactly 3 weeks before they start flooding the area," warned the lawyer. "If you can get the documentation, perhaps we can stop the project, but it will be a race against time." Next morning, armed with a borrowed camera and detailed instructions, Cecilia and Irapua began the journey back. The path seemed shorter now, driven by urgency and a clear purpose. They didn't talk about the danger. The men who had tried to ambush them would certainly be alert. They didn't talk about the fear of failing, of losing everything. They didn't talk about what was growing between them. Something still, unnamed, fragile like a new sprout after a fire. They focused only on the next step, the next curve in the road, the horizon that promised, if not hope, at least the chance to fight. The return to the village brought new urgency. Only 20 days remained until the final deadline. The news about the roadside ambush confirmed what they already suspected. Paulo Mendonça would not limit himself to legal means to ensure the dam project. The entire village mobilized in the documentation mission. Cecilia became the center of this operation. With the camera always in hand, she recorded each rare species, each sacred place, each traditional practice. Her unique vision allowed her to capture details that others would ignore. The exact moment when a nocturnal flower opened, the precise pattern of marks left by an endangered jaguar, the specific formation of stones that revealed an ancient ritual site. Jupira frequently accompanied her, identifying medicinal plants that were on the list of protected species. The elder noticed how Cecilia had changed. Her movements were now decisive, her gaze direct, her posture erect. "She has finally found her voice," she commented to Irapua as they watched the young woman meticulously photograph a nest of blue macaws. "She always had a voice," he replied. "She just needed someone who knew how to listen." Time passed mercilessly. In the village, preparations for possible physical resistance also took place, although Jupira insisted on the legal path. "Violence only generates more violence," she warned. "Our strength lies in our connection to this land." In the second week, the young engineer who had helped Cecilia appeared secretly in the village. His name was Rodrigo, he revealed, and he was increasingly disturbed by the irregularities of the project. He brought alarming news. Paulo Mendonça had moved up the schedule. The floodgates would be closed in just 10 days, not 20 as officially announced. "He wants to create a fait accompli before any judicial decision can stop him," he explained. Cecilia, who was carefully watching Rodrigo's lips while Irapua translated, had a sudden idea. She made quick gestures to Irapua, who nodded, impressed. Cecilia suggests that you take us to the construction site. She wants to photograph the irregularities directly at the source. Rodrigo paled. It would be extremely risky. There's armed security everywhere. But Cecilia insisted, her eyes conveying unwavering determination. Reluctantly, the engineer agreed to help them enter the construction site the following night, when he would be on duty. The mission would be dangerous. If they were discovered, there would be no way to explain their presence. Irapua tried to convince Cecilia to stay in the village, arguing that he could go alone. She categorically refused. Her fingers formed the sign he had taught her, heart. Then she pointed to the ground beneath her feet. That night, Cecilia couldn't sleep. She sat by the river where Janaina found her. The girl, sensing her restlessness, sat beside her and took her hand. They didn't need words. The child was simply offering presence, company on the threshold of danger. Cecilia took a twig and drew in the wet sand. A river, trees, people holding hands. Then, slowly, she drew a circle around everything. Like a protective embrace, Janaina smiled, understanding. She added to the drawing a small figure with a camera. Both laughed silently. In the early morning of the next day, Cecilia and Irapua met Rodrigo at the agreed point, 2 kilometers beyond the village. The engineer was visibly nervous, but determined. "I have access to the administrative sector," he explained. "There are the real maps, the reports that were hidden from the authorities." The construction site was impressive and frightening. Huge machines slept like prehistoric. Monsters' searchlights cut through the darkness in precise beams. The smell of fuel and concrete replaced the familiar aroma of the river and vegetation. Rodrigo guided them between containers and equipment, avoiding the guards who patrolled the perimeter. Finally, they reached a small prefabricated office. With his access card, Rodrigo quickly let them in. "We have 20 minutes at most before the guard makes his rounds here," he warned. Cecilia wasted no time. She methodically photographed each document that Rodrigo pointed out. Doctored reports, maps with deliberately omitted indigenous areas, internal memos ordering the acceleration of works to avoid judicial interference. Her hands worked with surgical precision, while Irapua watched the door. They were almost finished when a beam of light passed through the window. The guard had arrived earlier than expected. They crouched, motionless, as heavy footsteps circled the office. For a terrible moment, the doorknob turned, but the door was locked. After a few eternal seconds, the footsteps moved away. Rodrigo signaled that they needed to leave immediately. They made their way back even more carefully, hearts pounding, each shadow seeming a threat. They were almost reaching the outer perimeter. When disaster struck, a guard dog barked, alerting a security guard. "Run!" shouted Rodrigo. "I'll meet you at the starting point." Irapua grabbed Cecilia's hand, and they both dashed into the darkness, while Rodrigo headed in the opposite direction, deliberately drawing attention to himself. The barking increased. Alert shouts echoed through the site. Cecilia and Irapua ran like never before, taking advantage of every shadow, every obstacle to gain distance. Irapua knew the terrain better. Before construction began, that area was part of Guato hunting territory. He pulled Cecilia into a small stream where the water would mask their scent from the dogs. They walked along the creek bed for almost a kilometer before daring to return to the bank. Finally, exhausted and soaked, they reached the meeting point. Rodrigo wasn't there. They waited 2 agonizing hours, but the engineer didn't appear. "They caught him," concluded Irapua, somber. Cecilia pressed the camera against her chest, her expression divided between concern and determination. Rodrigo's sacrifice would not be in vain. Back at the village, the material was immediately organized. The photographs of the documents, combined with the images of protected species and sacred sites, formed a solid case. Jupira summoned a messenger to take everything to Dr. Helena in the capital. "Now we can only wait and prepare," declared the elder. The following days were of feverish preparation. If the legal path failed, they would physically resist. They would form a human chain, call the press, make the world witness what was about to happen. Cecilia didn't stop. She continued documenting, organizing, planning. At night, exhausted, she sat with Irapua by the river. They no longer needed words or even signs. Each other's presence had become its own language, clearer than any other. 3 days remained until the closing of the floodgates, when the unexpected happened. A delegation arrived at the village, official cars, journalists, even a television crew. At the front of everyone, Dr. Helena, with a triumphant smile, and beside her, to everyone's astonishment, Rodrigo, his face marked but alive. "We got the injunction," announced the lawyer, brandishing official documents. "The project is officially suspended until an independent commission re-evaluates all the environmental and archaeological impact." The village exploded in celebration. Rodrigo explained that he had been detained but released hours later. As an engineer on the project, his presence at the site hadn't raised permanent suspicions. But when the photos leaked to the press, Paulo Mendonça immediately accused me. I was fired, of course. He smiled without regret. It was worth every second. Dr. Helena completed the story. The evidence was so compelling that the judge not only granted the injunction, but ordered an investigation into fraud in the original studies. Paulo Mendonça is being investigated for falsification of public documents. The victory, however, was only the first step. "The legal battle will be long," warned the lawyer, "but now we have time and public opinion on our side." While everyone celebrated, Cecilia silently moved away. She walked to her favorite spot by the river, where the moon's reflection formed a silver path on the waters. She felt strangely light, as if an invisible weight had been removed from her shoulders. Not just the weight of the imminent threat, but something older, deeper, the weight of a lifetime being treated as less, as flawed, as disposable. Irapua found her there, as he always did. He sat beside her, offering not words, but presence. Cecilia turned to him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. Slowly, deliberately, she made the sign he had taught her, closed hand over the heart, then opened toward him. This time she completed the gesture. Irapua responded in the same way, without hesitation. They didn't need sounds for that promise to echo across the river, through the trees, across the starry sky. The next morning, Jupira found Cecilia helping the women prepare for the celebration. The elder observed for a moment before approaching. "You will never be sold again," she said, knowing that Cecilia would not hear her words, but would feel her intention. "This is your home now, forever." She placed in her hands a small amulet, carved in wood, the traditional Guato symbol for belonging. Cecilia pressed the amulet against her chest, her eyes conveying what her voice never could. That night, under bright stars, and to the sound of drums that she felt in the palms of her hands, Cecilia danced for the first time. Her movements, initially hesitant, soon found the rhythm that came not from the ears but from the heart. Irapua joined her, their hands occasionally touching, their bodies moving in harmony with the music that only one of them could hear, but both could feel. Around the fire, the village celebrated not just the victory over the dam, but something deeper and more lasting. The rebirth of a woman who had found her voice without uttering a single word, and the reaffirmation of a people who had protected their land by recognizing the value of silence. If this journey of overcoming and connection touched your heart, don't keep that feeling just for yourself. Share your impressions in the comments. Subscribe to follow more stories that make the soul vibrate, and leave your like as a small gesture that, like the joined hands of Cecilia and Irapua,